These don't know what this job entails, and until you sit in the seat, you don't know what the y'all be talking about. So yeah, they were judging how good we are at the job, and they were saying, well, listen, there's other people I think that can sit in those seats because they also create content. And my response was, yo, there's levels to this. I get y'all think what y'all doing at your crib or wherever else is the same thing as this.
The same shit. They be in the park. I had a good game in the park. Y'all gotta go watch Braun and say, yo, I could do that.
Emanny goes off on everyone hating on the Joe Budden podcast in the last Patreon episode. Now, this conversation was one that broached a serious discussion about the difference in smaller content creators versus the Joe Budden podcast co-host. Now, that is to me a fascinating discussion, as obviously I am on one side of the spectrum with Emanny being on the other. So I'm going to talk about this whole conversation, then give my thoughts, and then talk about how this whole thing came to a head. Emanny starts off by dismissing the pod's biggest naysayers and also apologizes for being just like the fans when he got on the show.
Yo, a lot of bullshit I was saying from fan perspective. So when I came up here that one time and I was saying like, yo, you know, it's 2 days. Boom, 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 boom.
I still stand. Apology,
no, hold on. I'm gonna get to it.
By that, he means that when he first arrived, Emanny, as a guest, was one of the biggest critiquers of the cast, often admonishing the co-hosts for their complaints about working on the show. He would say things like, oh, all you do is work 2 days a week, which caused a big kerfuffle with his fellow co-host, Ish.
You have to be here 2 days a week.
That don't constitute physical work. The louder you get, that'll make you writer. You could work from home remotely in your drawers and you do
because you're watching TV. You do that on your own spare time. That's not real work.
I don't.
What the f*** are you talking about?
Watch everything that Joe want me to watch in my fucking spare time.
Oh my God, you're getting paid to watch. Oh, how much work you doing?
What are you? You allocate time from spending with my fucking daughter to watch some that I normally would watch, and I could be in the gym.
That's bullshit.
You sound crazy
because you take time more.
And then he would also address Ice for his politically correct approach to podcasting.
I've said off the pod have been very careful about their words.
Like who? Ice is like
All
Ice.
of y'all.
No. But who? No, I'll answer. Like Ice.
It's funny you get on the platform where this is your moment to really be that.
Times have changed. This ain't then.
When Ice first got there, it was a big departure from his Twitter days where he was a troll and make really crazy jokes and even, you know, hate on some of the celebrities at the time, J. Cole, Lil Bow Wow, Meek Mill, and a bunch of other folks. Now it seems like Emanny has undergone a change of heart, as now he is saying that no one knows what it means to be a member of the Joe Budden podcast until they have to do it. He even takes it a step further by saying while there are some folks who have amassed audiences, there are still levels. I think Emanny could be talking about a variety of creators, including a channel like mine, also Elevation, aka Man in the Car, and even some of the folks on Twitter Spaces who host spaces with hundreds, sometimes even thousands of listeners in the audience. Emanny then closes this rant by saying podcasting in your house versus podcasting on the Joe Budden podcast is a totally different thing, with Ice likening the critiquers to people watching the NBA thinking they can go professional, and Ish would pile on in agreement. Now, my thoughts is there's a bit of a disconnect, because while I do think there's a huge difference between what a small creator does, we got to talk about the small creator versus the big creator, because to me, members of the Joe Budden podcast, at least some of them, fall into that small creator bag. Like you have Emanny. He's just a co-host of the show. He hasn't proven himself outside of that podcast. Same for Melissa Ford. She didn't do the greatest of views when she had her podcast. The only people who have proven themselves are Flip and Joe Budden. So to me, I think what Emanny is saying really has no merit. And if you look at the cast, especially Ice, they didn't start on the Joe Budden podcast with the greatest of flair. Ice was really a tough listen when he first got there, and I still think he's not all that. I do believe that he is a great connective tissue of the podcast. But as far as his performance off the pod, his content really isn't amazing. Like, he did the Twitch thing. Remember when he was on Twitch for a little bit? I tuned into that a couple times, and it wasn't the best product. And he also did Caffeine, which was also very lackluster. And if you look at Emanny, I think the most content creation he does is on Spaces, and I really think that he's kind of good at that, but even that, he's not the most elite at. And I urge all members of the Joe Budden podcast outside of Flip and Joe to launch a channel. You know, a lot of you have been trying to browbeat or look down upon the smaller creators, but you got to remember, to people like me, this is not me trying to be arrogant. I don't see any of the B mics as being an elevated status above this type of content, largely because until you run your own channel, respond to the comments, run a Patreon, run a Discord, and secure an ad, like having to find an ad where people pay you, you really don't know what you're talking about. You sit down and you co-host with a legend in the field of podcasting, Joe Budden, and he is a crutch for all of you. So I think all members of the show have to be careful about what they say about other creators, because they are largely dependent on Joe Budden. Now, I know people are going to say, Danny, but you're largely dependent on Joe Budden. In some ways, yes, that is completely true, but I'm not doing content with Joe Budden. Like, I'm not having to show up one day and I know someone's going to carry me through it. I actually have to prepare what I'm going to say. You have to go look for the stories and so on and so forth. But let me know what you think, listeners. Do you feel Emanny was talking a little bit out of turn considering his place within the Joe Budden universe? And by that, I mean, he is, like, when he first got there, it really appeared like he was going to be on the main podcast a lot more. And now he looks like he's Patreon only, and he's getting more looks because of Joe Budden's absence. So to me, he's largely regressed. And the fact that he's apologizing to Ish is wild to me. I don't think you should be apologizing to Ish or Ice, because Ice and Ish used to make those similar comments about the podcast job not being real work when they first got there, especially Ice. I mean, look at this clip right here where he says podcasting isn't real work.
Yeah, but when your friends become work,
no doubt, it's
now.
Yeah, this. I mean, I can't speak for y'all, but this, I wouldn't see this as work.
So as you can see, I think Emanny apologizing to Ish is just a reflection of how he tried to clash with Ish and things went bad. I mean, he was arguing with Ish on air. There was significant issues. They were going back and forth, and there was an argument so heated that they had it removed from the podcast. And I think it was because Emanny caught the Muffin Man treatment. So I don't know, y'all. I think Emanny, Ice, Melissa Ford, and Ish, prove me wrong. Hit the pods, hit the blogs, and let's see who really can make content. Let's see who can come up with ideas absent of Joe Budden. Because even Flip, who himself is a creator, he struggles without Joe. And a lot of the content he makes outside of the Joe Budden network seems rudderless. Now he's making more travel-like content, and I think that might go places because some of those people got like millions and millions of views, which is why I think he's going in that direction. But as far as within the Joe Budden audience, I don't think he strikes a chord to the level that he does when he's with Joe Budden. And I also want to end this video by saying, what are the returns on the No Budden podcast? A lot of folks, when it first started, they were feeling it. They were like, oh my God, the cast plays so well with each other. But now after a few episodes, I feel like it's starting to lose its luster. I didn't think it was the most amazing thing. I think they were doing a average job of replacing Joe. I don't think it was exceptional. I do think it was mediocre. I do think it's cool that Joe can go away. But you're even starting to see in some of the numbers that, hey man, the show was named the Joe Budden Podcast. It's not called I'll Name This Podcast Later, which is what happens when you rename a show after your namesake. The expectation is always going to be you will be around, and where you're not around, it's going to come off like an off-brand product. That's just the bottom line, and I think that's what the show is starting to look like. Flip, I feel like he isn't something that's sustainable. If you look at his own channel, there was times where he would just go on breaks without making content. He would stop podcasts and so on and so forth. But he's done a good job so far. However, Joe needs to return pretty soon. If not, it's going to be rough. All right, y'all. That's my video for now. Remember, this happened on the Patreon. It was an insightful episode. It was called The Birds in the Burbs. And I suggest you check it out. With that said, follow me on Instagram, The Stop TV. Follow me on Twitter, The Stop TV. Subscribe to my Patreon. There's a lot of folks joining the Patreon now, which I'm really proud of. It's hard to get people to pay for anything at any level, especially content they could just get for free by, well, not really, but for free. You got to give your data to get it, but just getting people to pay. That is pretty cool that you guys are so invested that you're willing to pay. And also, I've been posting stuff there. I think I'm going to hit Savon Studio, the Need to Know, and make more content. So stay tuned for that. I also got some cool projects I'm working on in 2025 that I think will really, really shock you. This is Danny from The Stop. Peace.